Question: how do scientists and science engagers address the diversity of languages when it comes to science engagement and communication? Well, of course, English is a primary language of instruction and communication in science. But think of this: Africa alone has over 2,000 languages. What then? How do we facilitate science engagement in a way that people can understand, relate to, connect with, and contribute to in their language of choice? This is a topic we have briefly explored previously in talking with Paige Giroux and Rami Traurig about the usage of American Sign Language in science communication, and also with Rania Verg around what should be done given the lack of linguistic diversity in scientific publications. Well, in this special series on the Questions of the Day program, the founder of Under the Microscope and SciCommTV's Africa special correspondent, Stephanie Okeyo, takes my seat and explores how different individuals and initiatives are using language to enhance science engagement in Africa. So you're in for a really nice treat. Stephanie takes a multifaceted approach to understanding this area by asking thought-provoking questions to various experts. These are scholars and practitioners working from different perspectives, including technology, education, research, edutainment, and linguistics. She had the opportunity to talk to various individuals representing 5 projects and initiatives that cover topics such as the role of policy in facilitating science education and communication in mother tongue languages, the cultural shift and Africans' attitudes towards their languages and views of Africa as a global scientific contributor, the exit and entry points of local languages in education, and so much more. Well, enough from me. As I said, you're in great hands in this special series. So here is Stephanie.
Hello, today we are joined by Dr. Jeanne and Annike from SeyCCAT, is the Seychelles Climate and Conservation Adaptation. And they did a national campaign for finding Creole names for seagrass. I'm going to let both of them introduce themselves. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Dr. Jeanne Mortimer. I'm a conservation scientist. I've been working mostly with sea turtles for most of my life, for many years. But I've always been interested in seagrass because seagrass is a very important habitat for sea turtles. And here in Seychelles, we didn't know that much about our seagrasses. So I was always keen to be able to work on it. Well, I started working with sea turtles. I saw my first sea turtle in 1973. It was quite a long time ago. I was working in Central America at the time. And I've worked in about 20 different countries around the world, but I'm most interested in the Western Indian Ocean, and especially Seychelles. And so I started working in Seychelles on and off in 1981. And now I have dual citizenship, so I am Seychellois. And I spend most of my time in Seychelles. And I've been interested in seagrass actually for quite a long time, because when I did my master's work back in the 1970s, I was looking at gut contents of green turtles in Nicaragua. It was going to the slaughterhouses, and the guts were filled with seagrass. So I've sort of made a full circle, with turtles in the middle.
It got you back to seagrass.
Yes, that's right. I'm still doing turtles too, but I love seagrass.
My name is Annike. I work at SeyCCAT, so Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. I'm the Coastal Wetlands and Climate Change Project Manager. I've been on the project since January 2020. As Jeanne said, I've been on board with seagrass a little bit less than her, definitely less time, but just as immersive. And having her on board as scientific advisor has brought a lot of knowledge, wisdom to me for learning about seagrass.
And I'm just curious, even before, how did you guys come up, or when did you realized that, oops, we don't have even a local name for this? How did this all start?
Um, I think I started noticing this when I was trying to get more information about seagrass from people, and Seychelles were trying to be helpful, and so people in the ministry and so on would say, oh, I have a really interesting seagrass to show you. So I'd go down and look at their seagrass, and I'd say, well, this is a really interesting organism, but it's not a seagrass. This is a seaweed. And then the more we started, talking to people, it was apparent that they really most people did not really have a name in the Creole language for seagrass. And in fact, they kind of were quite general about anything in the ocean that looked vaguely like a slimy plant was called gomo marin, meaning kind of plant-like and slimy in the marine environment. And, um, and so, it just, talking to people giving talks and so on, it became apparent that, people didn't know that much about seagrass. It just it hadn't been that important in the culture up till that point. And, um, and the word that was used, which is gomo, meaning kind of flat-like and slimy, is also used for mosses up in the forest, for algae down in the river, for fungus between your bathroom tiles. And so, we felt that it was really important to try to highlight the importance of seagrass in the culture. And the idea was not to reinvent the Creole language because there are people in Seychelles who have had a long experience with seagrass. These are mostly the fishermen, right? And so they were familiar with seagrass, but not all Seychelles are fishermen. And and a lot of Seychelles are quite, city types. They go to the beach, but they're not fishing.
Mhm.
And so they're more and more, I think the concept of seagrass was kind of receding from the public um, view, and we needed to kind of bring things together. Uh,
Mhm. And as someone who's working on the research space and has worked for years within this space, how do you think um what do you think is the role of science engagement or public investment or interest within research itself or the outputs or products of research? Because there is working and getting data and publishing and also influencing policy, but it's also public awareness and understanding on these topics.
That's
So
right. Yeah, I've always found that. I mean, I am a scientist. I do publish in high quality journals, but at some level, I kind of feel like we publish in these high quality journals. There's not that many people who read them. Mostly, they want to read them to criticize them. And what we really should be doing is to engage the public. And I also feel that there's a lot that the public can teach us. And, for me, working with sea turtles, for example, I've always been very keen to interact with the fishermen and find out what they can teach me about fishermen and turtle hunters, and find out what they can teach me about turtles because they have, they've been studying turtles. I mean, you
mhm,
can't hunt, them, you don't study them. So they know where are they feeding, where are they sleeping, how many are there, where can you find them? What are they doing? How can you approach them? And so I've been able to learn a lot from fishermen about turtles. And I think that it's also very important that when we do learn something, we need to give it back to the public
mhm,
because okay, we can lobby politicians, and that's very important. But the politicians are actually looking at their voters.
mhm,
And if their voters are not keen on a topic, politicians may not be that keen on a topic either. So it's really important, I think, to engage with all levels of society. And that's one thing I've really enjoyed about my job is over the years, have been able to engage with everybody, from the fishermen and people kind of working at kind of the more kind of on the ground uh, uh, work to children to politicians, to business people, right up to the presidents,
mhm.
in that work. And so that to me is quite fun. But you really need to engage all those levels, or you're not going to get too far.
Mhm. And it's interesting what you're saying. It just shows that science happens within a society and the interlinked one. in which we need to be involved in each and every level. But for this particular project, it was a national, correct me if I'm wrong, a national campaign. So what was the thought process in terms of even starting it or initiating it, and who did you have to involve? And at the end of the day, what did you see will be the expected outcome, of what did you hope to get out of this campaign?
Well, I think we wanted to engage the public. What we had one thing going against us, and that was we were right smack in the middle of COVID, so it made it a lot harder to go and engage with people. But fortunately, with the internet, there are ways to engage with people, and so the approach that we used was, based on what we know about seagrasses in Seychelles. We know there's about a dozen different species, but they actually, some of them are hard to tell apart. So the approach we took was, okay, let's look at the different life forms of seagrass, not necessarily different species exactly, but those life forms that are most obvious that anybody can detect without digging up the seagrass and having looking at its roots and everything, which is what you may have to do to get the species. So you get to the group. Now, another thing we were interested in was we wanted to find out what names were already being used. The idea was not to reinvent the Creole language. The idea was to find out what names were being used, most likely by fishermen or older people who've engaged with the seagrasses more in the past, but because they lived by the shore before reclamation came in and wiped out a lot of the seagrass meadows. And find out what names were being used. And sure enough, when we divided the seagrass up into 5 major life forms, 2 of those life forms already had names that people were using. And so that also what we wanted to do with that was to just amplify that and make it official and make everybody aware of those names. So it's not just a few people use them. But then there were a few life forms for the seagrasses that didn't really have names, but it seemed that they could use a name because they were obvious. And so what we did was we circulated to get this information. We circulated photographs showing the different life forms, and then we got feedback from people. Now it was obvious some of the names, some of the life forms that had names, people would come back with crazy names for them because they didn't know the name, the traditional, Creole name. But then with some of the other ones, people would come back with names, and some of them were quite interesting. And so then we fed those names back in a kind of a internet poll to ask people, of these, let's say of these 10 names, which is your favorite? Okay, but of these 5 names, which is your favorite? And then we culled it down to a set of 3 new names, which actually in some cases there were 2 names that were eventually adopted. And then we also needed to get the official or the true Creole name for seagrass in general. It's one thing to look at the life forms, but it's something else, just the whole concept of seagrass. And sure enough, there were names that were already in use. And we came up with, there were 2 that were most obvious that, are in common use amongst fishermen, especially, and people living, working with boats and so on.
Mhm.
So,
And for these names, are they specifically for these life forms or generally now to refer to seagrass? I'm asking because
well, the names for seagrass is Gomo zerb and zerb. So Gomo zerb means Gomo plant like in slimy grass, and zerb means grass in the sea. So those were clearly referring to the seagrass. And then of the other 2 life forms, one was Gomo torchi, which refers to the fact that this is a kind of seagrass that torchy or turtles like to eat. And these were just the ones that look like just kind of like strap-like leaves. There's several species that fall into that category.
Mhm.
But then there's another seagrass, which is very interesting. It's called the Creole name for it was Gomo grand fe, And that one is now kind of an endangered habitat because it lives in the areas that people like to reclaim, in the muddy areas. And so there used to be big meadows of gomographe, and they had fishes in it, and people were collecting clams in it. It was, quite a rich system, but it was adjacent to the coast, and it was muddy. And Seychelles, in fairness, needs more land because we have mountainous islands, but not much flat area. So those were the first to go. And
Mhm.
so a lot of that area was reclaimed. The airport was built on reclaimed seagrass meadows. Most of this city of Victoria was built on reclaimed seagrass meadows. Um, and so the older people were very familiar with these habitats, but now they're almost gone from
Mm.
Hahe. So, one thing I've enjoyed doing is going back and interviewing some of the older people and ask them about what was in the seagrass meadows and what species of fish were there and so it's interesting.
Mhm. And a question to both of you, what have the lessons or what have you learned from this experience for this particular initiative?
Yeah. Why don't
But
Shall I let Annike answer that one?
It's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Um, it's been a very hard process, but also it's been rewarding in a different way. So under the project, we liaise mainly with policymakers, with scientists, but then having this activity, and I think Jeanne can agree, we had to reach out to fishermen, district administrators. So they are groups of people that we wouldn't necessarily have brought in or have involved in the project, but having this activity has brought them in. And I think while we were doing this activity, um, we built a relationship and a partnership with them. So it's quite nice to see that it's still recognizable as well. And even with the Seychelles Creole Academy, um, when we did that, it was we kept in contact with them, and then recently this year we have the Creole dictionary on like it's literally on my shelf right there. That book right there. So it's really nice to have that physical output from this activity, and it's been about 3 years in the making, but these partnerships have been valuable, and we are still seeing the benefits of them till now. And Madam Ben David has been able to join us, so that shows the partnership itself.
so it's interesting how as a SeyCCAT, I would say as a research institute, you got into now working with the Seychelles Creole Academy, with also the ministry. Um, why was that? ha- I think Anika, you've touched on how that process was a little bit, but also why was that essential, especially for this particular project? Because one of the outputs you see is an updated dictionary with the name, and also a wide distribution. I think Seychelles is a little bit interesting because of the many islands. So how was this also into the implementation process of it? Um, and how long did even the stakeholder engagement or mapping take?
So I'll start, and then Jean and Madam Ben David can jump in. So when we first started the activity, it was unknown what we needed to do, who we needed to speak to. But between myself, Jean, and Marie France, we knew right away the Seychelles Creole Academy needed to be involved, because they are that academy for all things the Creole culture, the language itself. But we also knew that we needed to include the linguists as well as the marine scientists. Um, so it was a little bit of touch and go at the very beginning, where we needed to know who needed to be involved. How do we work through it? And within that group of the marine scientists, the linguist, we formed a small committee and they were able to advise us on the necessary steps. And we from the beginning as well, reached out to the Seychelles Creole Academy through Madame Ben David, as well as some of their staff, like Miss Fourchette, to know what the process would be. And that gave us also a timeline of what we needed to do till the end. And that end part was having the words submitted to the Seychelles Creole Academy. Jean, if you have any other more
No,
in-depth
and I think, our timing was very good because, as you know, the new Seychelles dictionary came out fairly recently. So we were able to go through this entire process and get it incorporated officially into the dictionary, which is great. But the whole concept of, public engagement, it still continues because we still are promoting understanding of seagrasses, but also the names. Because the names, how do you expect people to protect something or value something if they don't have a name for it?
Yeah.
I mean, especially if the name means slimy and plant-like. I mean, it's you need to you need to, build up more respect. And uh, so I teach part-time at the University of Seychelles, and so I've got incorporated modules that focus on seagrass and sub-modules that focus on the Creole names and how we derive them and what they mean. And I think that, by using Creole names, it has helped even the students, even the advanced students, like in the university. Um, it's this there aren't really common English names in use for seagrass in Seychelles, and in fact, in most parts of the world, they're not that much in use. But and the Latin names are dreary. They're so ponderous. And but I noticed that the students are really quick to pick up on the Creole names. And one of them that's really quite funny is there's one whole group of seagrass called Helophylla, which has two it's two oval leaves. And there's two Creole names we using for that. And one is the Tiffe oval, which is a small oval leaf, because that's what it is. But the one that has really caught on with people is the second name is uh, Zoé Lapin, Zoé Lapin, which means rabbit ears. And people immediately they'll start saying, "Oh yes, I saw the rabbit ears over there," and I saw Zoé Lapin là-bas, I saw Zoé Lapin là-bas, and that one it hooks on. Whereas if you expect them to talk about halafala, it's not likely to happen.
Yeah.
So these kind of names that people can relate to are very important. And it's like, what the one that I started to talk about before, the Gomo Grand Fe, that means, the Gomo with the long leaves, which get to be 1.5 meters long. So it's very distinctive. It's something people can relate to very easily, the name. And so this bill, we need to highlight it.
And I think it's interesting also what you're saying is that people can protect or to what they relate to and to what they understand. So the concept of language, I think, plays a big role, first of all, even before we get into the education aspect of it, or even knowledge exchange. My last question to you, Dr. Jean, will be: the scientific space is mainly done in English, but also the concept of Africa. I'm going to say Africa because Africa is not a country, has 50 plus countries, but have also 2,000 plus languages. So how do you think we get into public engagement and tap into the avenue of using local languages to bring in more engagement and understanding within the scientific space?
Yeah, I think it's maybe just need to focus on it and make sure that when we're talking to people, we do that insofar as possible, and maybe in other fields, people could do like we did, where we say, oh, okay, look at these, they don't have a real name, at least not a name that's in common use. Let's highlight that, because until people have a name, it means very little. I mean, how do they talk about something? How do they refer to it if they don't have a name for it? It's so basic. And I guess I guess different situations will have different approaches, but I think it's important that make sure that, I guess, make sure everything that you're interested in, that you love and you want people to understand, has a name and a name that people can relate to.
Mhm, mhm. And what will be your advice for young scientists who are coming in? I think also there is a shift in scientific culture on what excellence is, and that also involves having an impact on the community or the population or the area or that you want to have impact on. So for young scientists who are coming within this space, what would be your advice in terms of the importance or of looking at how do you really engage people within your research?
Yeah, I think what's important is, like, if you look back in time, a lot of scientists like to get, they talk about scientists being ivory tower types because they get in their little ivory tower, they talk to each other, and they're so proud of the fact that they're, can be very high tech, and I think that that's very silly because to me, I think what's really important is to engage as many people as possible, try to bring information to the level of people so that they understand it. You may feel good about yourself as a scientist because you can talk to other people who only talk this fancy scientific language, but that's not what's going to, you know, help. It's certainly not going to help conservation. It's not going to help the environment, and it's not going to impact society. I think when you write a scientific paper, you need to bring it down and explain what you did to people. So that because most people will not read a scientific paper, they're boring. I even find them boring to read. They're tedious. I mean, you need to read them, but they're hard to read. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in there that needs to be brought to the level of the general society so that people can understand, and then they can take what you have learned, and bring it up to their families, to their friends, to their politicians, and into government and change policy. So I'd say, you know, with for young scientists, I think it's important. Don't be afraid to engage with as many people as possible. If whatever you're doing, talk to people. If you're down on the beach collecting samples and someone walks by, talk to them. Tell them what you're doing. Why is this interesting? And once people, I think almost anything is interesting once you get to learn about it. Things are not interesting when you don't know anything about them.
Yeah.
But once you start to get some understanding, all of a sudden, oh, that is kind of interesting. And then as you learn more and more, it becomes more and more interesting. And then everything starts linking together and you realize that this topic links with that topic and that topic and everything, then you can start to have impacts on general society and on government and the environment.
Mhm. Thank you. And that is a good way to finish this conversation. And Annike, I'm also interested to know if you have any tip for anyone who's trying to get into public science engagement.
Um, any tips? So for me, it would be persevere. There are days where, like we don't get a hold of somebody or, everybody has very busy schedules. But it pays off to, I suppose, nag a little bit, but also have people from the very beginning of a process be there. So a very good example, and I'm sure Jean would agree, is having the Seychelles Creole Academy with us from the very beginning. And even though once we finished the activity and handed over the words to the Creole Academy, we kept in touch with them over the couple of months. So almost 2 years, we were just checking up, is everything okay? How is the dictionary coming along? And they also kept that partnership moving. And so when we knew the dictionaries were in country, we were invited for that official ceremony. So we got to see them handing over the dictionaries to the students in every school around the island, and then the institutions and government departments that were there as well. And we were part of that as well. So, it almost felt very full circle. It's a full circle. We were very proud, SeyCCAT, to be invited and to actually have the dictionary in hand at that moment. So, yeah, we were perseverance and determination.
Thank you so much, Annike and Dr. Jim.
Mm.